Welcome back to the Mature Male Podcast. I'm your host, Wes, a psychotherapist helping men mature through timeless wisdom and guidance. Today's guest is Stephen Foster. Stephen is a Mexican-American contemplative creative who works as a writer, photographer, and YouTuber. He creates content about the exodus from the religion of careers and explores analog tools for writing, recording, and living a complete life. Formerly a Silicon Valley systems and software engineer, he was one of the youngest full-time employees at Apple when he started at just 18 years old. During his 6 years there, he witnessed Apple's rise with the iPhone and iPad, including the final years of Steve Jobs' life. He contributed to the unicorn exit of lynda.com, to LinkedIn for over $1 billion and worked at Balaji Srinivasan's co-founded genomics startup Council, if that's not a mouthful, among other tech companies. He left Silicon Valley in 2020 and now resides in Idaho, the potato state, with his wife and kids. As a lifelong Christian, he has disciplined himself in Latin and the practices of the Spanish mystics, with Jesus Christ as his Lord, Savior, and King. Stephen, welcome.
Thanks, Wes. Thank you, man.
Good to have you.
So stoked to be here.
Me too. So you've made this fascinating transition from being deeply embedded in Silicon Valley to deliberately stepping away from that world. What led you to recognize what you call the religion of careers and make that exodus?
Great opener. I think the tug had come very early on, like as a Mexican American. My family came from Mexico, to work agricultural. Work the fields in Arizona, California. I think there was one season where they ended up in southern Idaho, which was kind of a fun thing to learn once I got up here. But I had explained to my grandparents that when I got this job at Apple, which was like this 1 in a million shot for an 18-year-old kid, that I wasn't picking apples. They're like, I was building computers at a company named Apple, right? Because like my grandparents, they're they have pretty good English, serviceable English. They grew up Spanish speakers, right? And so that was the difference between those two worlds. So in a lot of ways, it felt like I was living out a dream, but I was living out a dream that was very different than anything I'd ever been prepared for in my life, right? And I'd grown up in this realm where I'd been between both, sort of the Mexican Catholicism and that sort of old Christian tradition, and then the Calvary movement had happened, and this like more charismatic Protestant Christianity had come on the scene. I was a part of that too, and I didn't know what to make of Silicon Valley. At first, it seemed awesome, right? It just seemed like, yeah, we're changing the world, we're making the world a better place, right? Like we're going to empower all these people and give them these tools. I think if I could pin it to one like pivotal moment, my wife and I were a part of this awesome church in San Francisco called Reality Reality San Francisco. Dave Lomas was the pastor there, amazing pastor. He had already been kind of teaching on the Spanish mystics and Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross and Ignatius of Loyola, and really getting deep into their spiritualities, their walks with Jesus. And John Mark Comer, who at the time was the pastor of Bridgetown Church in Portland, had come down to give a sermon at Reality San Francisco. And it's still, you can find it online. I think it was from like 2017. And I remember sitting in the audience, like listening to this sermon, thinking like, he really was the one that was like kind of calling out the fact that like our careers are religions. Like I didn't invent that, and I'm sure he didn't invent that either, but he was kind of, I think, like one of the early people in our generation to really see like we're actually taking this to the next level with everything we're doing in Silicon Valley, just how much our lives are wrapped up into this world. And it was a slow burn for me from that point, right? I stayed in for like another 3 years. And it was actually a couple months before the pandemic that I had resolved to sort of separate, thinking, oh, I'll just try to like slowly back out, find another job in tech, but go back home to San Diego or maybe go back to Mexico and just try to slow down life a little bit. And my wife and I, my wife in her own regard is a brilliant woman. She'd worked at a Hotel Tonight, which exited to Airbnb. So we both were kind of hitting that like, wow, we've done a lot. We're exhausted, and maybe it's time to go try something else. And I guess I can't understate the spiritual component part too, just about how being, especially around San Francisco, seeing, I guess the spiritual, I don't know what it was, like the homelessness, the drugs, everything you've probably heard about in the media, we saw and saw way more than anything you probably ever saw in any form of media. And it was very heavy. And so I remember thinking like, hey, how can we be a part of being a force for good in there for a few years? And that was something that we were really focused on. We got involved in some ministries and worked with a lot of different people. But then it became time where it was just like, all right, it's our time to not be here anymore. We've been called to come out of this and enter into a new chapter of life. So it's kind of a combination of things of both like what happened with the pandemic, but stuff was already kind of moving from there, the sort of spiritual side of things, and this observation about careers being religions, which should alarm all of us, right? Like we have a freedom of religion. And I think a lot of people think that that is a freedom from religion. But I think the problem of that is like if we free ourselves actually from our religio, like our relationship with the most divine thing, we end up giving that to some other institution. And there aren't actually any other worthwhile institutions to give, divine relationships with. But I think we've betrayed ourselves in a lot of ways to give a lot of that, if not wholeheartedly, but subconsciously to these careers, to these companies, to these corporations. So yeah, examining all those things, it was a slow march. Right now, it's been 5 years that I've been living in the potato state, up in the mountains, forests, stuff.
I'm struck by a few things. First, it seems like you hit an ideal climax pretty early on in your career. Not even at that point
Yeah,
30 where you had
I
already
was
had those
29. Yeah, I
okay,
was
so right, you're
29
right
when
there
I
at the
left.
precipice.
Yeah.
So having those experiences that I think a lot of people spend many years aiming towards and don't question it, and then it seems like once you reached it, that opened up a questioning in you, almost as if you hadn't reached it, it wouldn't be the same level of questioning. I'm curious if you resonate with that. That feels true. And if so, so many of us are brainwashed into not questioning. What are some signs you felt, maybe intuitively or externally, that helped you start to separate yourself from the religion of career and start process that maybe this isn't all life is?
They say like failure can sometimes be the best teacher, but like success can be very revealing, right? Like
Mm.
success can actually make you very naked. And yeah, by 18, I was a full-time employee at Apple, ended up in Cupertino, had no clue what I was doing. I remember like when they put me in corporate housing, they couldn't even give me a rental car because I was in California, you have to be 25 to rent a car. Well, on a corporate policy, you can do it at 21, and I was 19. And so like they were just like, and Uber didn't exist yet. I think we had just launched the App Store, and maybe Uber existed in downtown San Francisco, but I couldn't use it to get around like San Jose, Cupertino area. So I remember like I walked a couple times, like a mile from like where I was in like corporate housing to the office. I would like bum rides off of friends and stuff, or like try to coordinate. Yeah, it was wild. And then yeah, by 21, I'm over at lynda.com, and everyone knows how that went. That was like meteoric. It was amazing. It was, so basically it's like, okay, cool. So your first job, out of high school is working for one of the most valuable tech companies in the world, that's in its prime. I was there for the original iPad launch. I had shown up right after the original iPhone launch, and then go to lynda.com and have be a part of $1 billion exit. And yeah, by 23, 24 years old, I think it was 24, ended up over at Balji's counsel, and he went on to Coinbase, and now stuff he's doing with the network state. And it's like, yeah, by like 25, and then I got married, at 25, and I'm just thinking like, what else is there? Like I won, and there was a real danger in that because it made me naked. It really did make me naked. It was like, so now what am I working for? Right? Like what, I got the girl, I got the medals on my, resume. Like I actually remember, it actually didn't even sink in fast enough. I'm actually like, humbled to admit that like, it really didn't, like, I was still operating out of like poor Hispanic kid mode until I actually even went back to work at Apple. And I remember thinking, I joined internally with the engineers. We had an Apple book club, and I was like, and as someone who never went to college, I'm like, I'm just soaking up all this information. And I remember thinking, I'm now rich enough to just buy any book I want and read it. Like that was like the town I grew up in didn't even have a library. It was just outside of San Diego. The new San Diego library that's there now wasn't there. It was actually really hard to like get a hold of a book. And my parents did a great job. My grandparents, my aunts and uncles did a great job of trying to give me every resource possible. But like, it was not the same as like that switch flipping in your head where it was like, I can afford any piece of knowledge, any piece of like written word, and I'm just going to devour it. Right. And I think, yeah, I was like going back to Apple that I realized like I'm not poor anymore. And I don't have to like let money be a gate on my knowledge. And then that started, I think, is what started opening up then like, so what are my hopes and dreams? And to be honest, it's also kind of like humbling to say like I got in my own way, because if I actually look back at it, I didn't need to have all that success to start asking the questions like, who am I? What am I good at? What I really care about? I was just trying to be like, let's just try to go make money and be smart, and hopefully someone will love me and care about me. So I think a lot of it really was like the success made me naked, and I was very slow to realize. And as I realized it, it unfolded, and at times it was very stressful because you're thinking like, oh, like Silicon Valley life is so weird where you're just like, oh, if I'm not making $250,000 a year, $500,000 a year, how am I going to live? And thank God I had this like checksum of like, no, I can go back to Mexico and I'm watching family members live on $8,000 to $10,000, $12,000 a year. And so I think having that was very sobering, because the poorest people I've ever met in the United States are, don't hold a candle to the poorest people in Mexico. That we have so many resources here. And I don't mean that as an insult. I really do, think the United States, there's still so much good in this country. The access to wealth and resources that we have, and the things that we can do for our, the things that we have the capacity to do for our fellow man. Not to say that it always happens, but the options, the opportunities are, they're very significant, and they outweigh, the opportunities and things that you can find in Mexico. It's getting better in Mexico, obviously, as well. I love Mexico. Not a knock on Mexico either. A lot of family there, but it was very sobering to go back to Mexico and see a reality. See that contrast from Silicon Valley life to I'm in the jungle, right? Like not tourist town. Like I'm in Michoacan, like with my family, my ancestral homeland, and that was good. That was really good to have that sobering and go. Yeah, if I ever had to go live on $10,000 a year, I'd be happy because I'd do it with my family and it'd be great.
Such a unique gift, I imagine, based on the average demographics in software. You have more of a unique story in that direct lineage connection to a country like Mexico. And it seems like it helped you constantly reframe and give you a new point of reference for what was normal, what was accepted, what was doable. And I appreciate that word naked. I think it's a drastic word in a good way. And I think it points to the vulnerability that a lot of guys struggle with. I'm curious if you can speak to this process where a lot of men find themselves, which is they're in the grind, they're living the dream, or they're pursuing the dream, and they're in this bubble, in this isolated world where what success is, you mentioned that, what normalcy is, all those things are defined for them. Maybe they don't have family in Mexico as a point of reference, but what are some ways a guy can get out of his own head in that tech kind of world or corporate world or the standard process that most men pursue as a career? And how can they start to go on a greater adventure like you did yourself?
Pray, like, and not in your heart or in your head, but go, um, at our local parish here, you can go pray for the vocation of the priests. Or there's less clergy and deaconship today in the United States than I think there's ever been per capita, right? For faithful trying to be served. There are sick people, right? There are people that can't do things for themselves. And fortunately in the United States we have so many, and I think more broadly speaking, find an organization within your community that is deeply embedded in your community, that is serving people in your community. And you don't need to go on a missions trip to some third world country putting all that in quotes because Mexico's not a third world country. They're a great country. You can serve people probably within a 1 mile radius of you that will change your life. And it may even be something as simple as going to go get groceries for someone, taking someone out for a meal, taking someone to a doctor's appointment. It may be making a meal for someone. You may be like, I don't know how to cook, right? It's like, dude, you got the internet, like you got YouTube, right? Like my boy Ethan Chabalski over there on YouTube. Shout out to Ethan. You know, like you go watch some of his videos, and like in an hour, you're gonna be whipping up something great. But pray, like come alongside people, and I could say I did not take advantage of that enough when I was still in San Francisco. I did it a few times, could have done it way more. Got very convicted about it when I came to Idaho. The first house that we lived in up here before we got our homestead, there was a widow on one side of us and a single mother on the other. You know, I tell the stories like there's, you know, this single mother who's like 5'0" across the street from us or across the road from us. She's trying to set up this basketball hoop for her son, right? And I come home, I'm like in between meetings, I'm about to be late to my next meeting, kind of like how I was late for this meeting, but I was late for this meeting because my wife had an ultrasound appointment that I wanted to be at, right? But in this case, like I just saw this woman, she needed help, right? And I think that's like not a cool thing to talk about anymore, or like, you know, we can get kind of weird about it, but I think if you resolve inside of yourself to be genuine about those things and go, I just came up and said, hey, can I help you with this thing? Like, can I help put this together? And I had, you know, built a rapport with her. She knows my wife. And she's like, yeah, actually, that would be awesome. Right. And like, thank you so much. And then just sit in those little moments and pray and ask, you know, like, how, like, do you need anything? Can I do anything else for you? Like, oh no, we're good. Like, don't take, oh no, we're good for an answer. Right. Like this life, everyone knows like this life, that's one of the weirdest things actually, you know, people say, you know, I'm bringing out Mexican in me a little bit more, but it's like, it's weird to ask people how you're doing in other countries. We've actually created this like weird facade in the United States where we'll ask people like, hey, how you doing? And everyone's like, good. And it's like, oh, it must all be good. Like everyone asks each other how they're doing. It's good. And it's like, it's actually very deceptive. And it's also very like, cheapening of the human experience. Right. So like, you kind of have to, don't pry, but at the same time be like, well, I would love to just bless you. Like we don't even talk about like blessing people anymore, you know, and you don't have to be a priest or like some, you know, radical religious person to do that. Just be like, just bless people, wish people well. Like that's what I love about, one of the things I love about Mexico is like, we don't say hello to people. You very rarely say hi to people. You wish people well, like buen dia, right? Like you wish people a good day. And it's such a simple, small thing, but it's a blessing. And it changes the orientation of your heart from having a minimal transactional relationship with your fellow man versus like blessing someone and wishing someone well, and what kind of posture that puts your heart in, what kind of posture that puts someone else's heart in. I think if you begin to practice that's a really hard thing to practice, I think, in downtown San Francisco, right? Especially if you're in the financial district, right? Trying to like wish people well on the street, right? Like you're gonna get weird looks. People are gonna like not even look at you. They're gonna try to pretend you don't exist. But wish people well and pray for them. And I think that will be the thing that begins to transform your heart. And just get involved, show up to stuff. It doesn't need to consume your entire life, but if you do it, you know, a few times a week, every day, sprinkle it in. You know, it's a seasoning. It's not like necessarily the main course. It doesn't have to be the main course. For some people, they're called to that thing as the main course, right? I think about Mother Teresa, you know, Jose Maria Escriva, just some of these great saints, right? And it's like for some people, that's, you know, that's their thing, right? I think for most of us, it at least needs to be a seasoning on the dish. And a lot of people, they're eating freaking beans on toast like how the British eat beans on toast, right? And they're not eating molletes, which is like how the Mexicans do beans on toast, which is freaking awesome. And you should, if you don't know what either of these two things are as an American, go Google both of these right now. There's never been a more stark contrast in your life than what the British do with beans on toast and what the Mexicans do with beans on toast. And that's my analogy for this podcast.
I love that, man. Yeah, you got to look it up. That is, I'll actually add a visual to that. But you know, it's making me think about how Teresa of Avila, towards the end of her life, she said, I have one prayer, and that's asking God, how can I be helpful? I mean, this woman lives and transcends all these spiritual stages, and she has this massive vision, as you know, an interior castle, and she's had these ecstatic visions you would think would be at the top of her theology and how she sees God, and yet she actually descends and asks that question, how can I be helpful? And it is true that we've lost the art of servitude and helping others. And that is something in the religion of careers, in that the difference in that kind of religion is it serves yourself, so it's an idol. And there is no benefit to working your job except for you. And when you look around and you realize life is greater than you, this is a core component of the male spirituality and the journey of rites of passages, the freedom of realizing you're not that special and the world doesn't revolve around you. And how many of us men just build our value and worth in what we do and what we can prove, what we can earn. And when you start to implement these practices, like you're saying, it starts to decompose that idol that we think of who we are. And it gets you outside of yourself and it helps you see things greater than you. And it frees you up not to put so much pressure on yourself to figure it out. Hanging a basketball hoop does not require a degree. And it's not about getting a date or, all these objective outcomes that we love to move towards. It seems like something in you had a generative energy that was called forth to say, I'm just going to help for the sake of being helpful. And how we need that, not just as a one-off, but what you're getting at, if I'm picking up on this correctly, is it has to be a discipline. Just like working out is something that, yes, you're doing it for you, but you're also doing it so that you can be healthy and, energetic for others. And I'm curious, why do you think the art of servitude has been lost, and why it's not a virtue that men today live by?
Yeah, I like that. And I would even go in your statement, maybe invite a couple modifications on it, which is that you are special. And what doesn't make you special, I think this is what we would agree on, is like what does not make you special is your earning potential, your status, who signs your checks, right? The kind of car you drive, if you have a house or not, even. I think about that a lot. My great grandfather somehow wooed my great grandmother and brought her to the United States. And they never owned a home. They lived in a trailer for most of their life, or and they had 13 kids, and it's just like, um, yeah. So that, when people tell me that, like, oh, I can't get a wife because I don't make enough money or I don't have a house, I'm like, nope, that doesn't check out. And it's like, oh yeah, I can't have kids because I can't afford them. Man, when I hear that, I've even been guilty of thinking that, and my grandparents just like hit me over the head with that one. Are you joking? Like, are you silly? Like, what's going on here? It's not true. That's a whole other thread we can go down. But I think to get at your question, right? We haven't actually lost the discipline of servitude. We've just been told that serving something else is more worthwhile, right? Like, and actually, we've been told it's actually not that different from the Exodus story in the Bible, right? I make a mention of this a lot in my work. I wrote this essay called "Commit a Career-Ending Move." It was my like semi-viral essay on Substack or whatever a couple of years ago. It's like, who cares if you're the greatest mason in Egypt, right? Like, you're just making someone else's grave, right? You're a slave for someone else's grave. And I think that's where most of us land, is like, we aren't actually serving ourselves. If we're being completely honest about our careers, right? Like, we say it's like, oh, this is like, because, this is going to make me worthwhile, right? Like, we're not actually even serving ourselves. We are trading our eternal souls, right? And the time we will never get back, right? For like finite value to be imbued somewhere else, whether it's inside of some corporation or whatever, or maybe we put it on to, the resume points or to whatever it is. I think that's the thing. It's like, we haven't lost it. We've redirected all those efforts into a place that is like, it's literally like sending all the energy of the sun into a black hole, right? Like, we haven't lost the sun. We've just sent it all, into the wrong direction. Right. My wife and I, towards the end of our time in the San Francisco Bay Area and Silicon Valley working in tech, we would say, like, these aren't full-time jobs. These are all-time jobs. They're all-time jobs. They, like, the phone calls, the emails, even on the weekends, and like, oh, unlimited vacation time, unlimited PTO. That was like a big thing back then. It's just like, no, like, they're still calling and texting and emailing you. You're supposed to be online and on, the chat apps and all this stuff with everyone. And, you're getting the GitHub pull requests all the time. It's just like they're all time jobs, right? And so like all of our service, where it used to be oriented and ordered and ordained even over like a calendar and over seasons and over time, like we take for granted that we have a Gregorian calendar, right? That like, had, at a time like holidays were holy days, and like we actually looked at things like the rhythms of the sun coming up and down, right? And like when the food was ready in the field to be sort of our markers and indicators of time, right?
Hmm.
And we've effectively destroyed all guardrails, all safety nets on that system. We've given people like laptops with lights that will just shine suns into their face. I actually remember, this is like a funny, I guess, Hispanic kid thing, but like the place where I grew up, like we lived down the road from a chicken ranch. Like there was no grocery store actually within our community area. We actually, like, you would go to a chicken farm, you go to the dairy, right? Like, and I remember like they would leave the lights on for the animals, right, to like make them produce more eggs, right, and like basically elongate their days for more production. And I remember like when I first got into the like office at Apple, and every office since, it's not a unique thing to just Apple, but like I remember looking at those fluorescent lights overhead, thinking, "Oh my gosh, I'm one of the chickens." One of the chickens. Like they just want me to lay more eggs, man. So yeah, I don't think we've lost it, but to regain it means chipping away at the all-time job, right? Which literally, like, you chip away 5% off your all-time job, you jeopardize your all-time job, right? And if your all-time job is your status, your savior, your security, right? Like it's trained you to think you can't even chip away 1%, 2% of that thing, right? So like you have to have that exodus moment where you redefine what all these things are, and you don't have to redefine it yourself, right? The great thing about our age today is like you can go. I was just talking about this friend that I have, talking to you right before we started recording, was like, this friend of mine just got laid off, right? And he's like, I think I'm gonna go just apprentice as an electrician or like go frame houses, right? Because where he lives in California, there's not enough of those kinds of people. He knows the people, he knows how to do that kind of stuff. Brilliant scientist, brilliant scientist that could be easily making more money than I've ever made. And he's like, no, I need to take a step back from this. Like I'm so burnt. And that's hard work too, right? Like there's other traps you can fall into in the construction and the trades too. But I think there's a little bit more. Let's just say drywall doesn't text you in the middle of the night saying hang me. So that's that part. But yeah, I don't think we've forgotten the discipline of service. I think we're just in service to something that we don't.
Yeah, that's well said. And only the picture is asking to be hung on the drywall.
Hopefully not at 2 a.m.
Definitely not. That redefines late night hang. But yeah, I think what you're getting at too is slowly, in a healthy way, disassociating from the all-time job and starting to phase out and then replace that time and energy with something more meaningful. I think a lot of guys are in this holding pattern. I've noticed that I've worked with
Hmm.
even clients where they say,
Yeah.
I'm so deep in, my job's requiring everything of me. I have no mental space to even process what I would do. And Wes, if I quit tomorrow, I would lose it because I would be thinking about needing to make, a paycheck, income security, while I figured out what I'm supposed to do. And I think there is this crisis a lot of guys live in of asking, how do I go about finding my purpose and meaning? I think that's also an interesting questioning because, as you and I both know, a lot of people who work the majority of jobs globally aren't asking this existential question. They don't have that privilege, right? I mean, a job is just a job, right? I mean, if someone working asking, are they really made to do that, So maybe you could speak to that. But another thing I'm also curious about is, let's say a guy's questioning, he wants to chip away at the all-time job and start to shift into something else. You yourself started writing, you did YouTube, and I'd love to hear about that analog life that you are focusing on. What would you recommend are some steps for a guy to start to decrease his involvement in that day job and start to explore other means of work that may be just as meaningful, even though they look different?
What's funny is when I hit that moment, where I, felt like I had all the success, in the world and could do anything. I actually started uploading videos to YouTube. This is like 2016. Actually, you can go back on my YouTube channel. It was January 2016. I uploaded my first YouTube videos, and it was just fun. It was just like me having fun. I was doing photography stuff, and I ended up going back to work in Silicon Valley for the rest of that decade. But looking back on it, I'm like, shoot, if I had just kept cranking through that moment, I would have been in, who knows where I'd be now. But, that's kind of always the question, the hindsight's 2020 sort of thing. But I think it comes down to a couple things. The first thing is you gotta know people. If your job is your religion, and this is a great way to check to see if your job is your religion. If you're kind of like, I don't think I'm not religious about my job, right? Maybe that's really resonant for some people. When I say that and share that with, the people I've spoken to, the appearances I've done, and the writing I do online, about 50% of the people are like, ooh, dang, yeah, that hits. And then another 50% are like, I don't know, that sounds like a little extreme. If the majority of your friends in your life, or the majority of the people that you interact with on a weekly basis, are the people that you work with, and I'm talking like 80-90% of those people that you work with, that is the sign of religion job. Some people, all they're surrounded with is just people that they work with. And that's not a bad thing, right? Like there can be great, healthy, wonderful relationships that can be established and flourish through professional environments. But part of what will make a job or a career difficult leaving is if it's also the abandonment of your community, right? Like in the Exodus story, the entire community comes out of Egypt, right? It's actually really painful for Moses when he has to leave first on his own and then come back and get everyone else, right? So he, as the leader, has to bear that thing. You don't have to, right? Like finding community, whether that is in a religious institution, some other type of organization that allows you to serve your community. Maybe it's just simply finding another couple that shares similar values to you. My wife and I loved soccer. We've been to a ton of different MLS stadiums in the United States and love going to national team matches. And that's just a huge thing for us. We've met a whole community through that realm, right? I do think the actual religious community solution is probably the thing we're designed for as people. But you got to have a community outside of your work, and people who, like my friend did today, he's got laid off, and I'm one of the few people that he could have called. Now we met through a different job, but we stayed in touch at least, and we actually built our community a little bit more off of some of those shared religious values, right? We just happen to find each other in the workplace, but have a community that you're invested in, and you have to pursue those things, right? Like if your job is literally working you 7 days a week, 24/7, all-time job status, right? Like even my wife and I saying all-time job, we were still able to go to church for 2 hours on a Sunday morning, right? We would still then come home and work. God's like, one of the 10 commandments, remember the Sabbath, and no one does it, right? And then he's like, also try not to murder. And you're like, oh yeah, I'm not a murderer, right? And he's like, cool. That's on the same level as taking a day off, right? Because you actually murder yourself. Like God actually looks at you and he's like, not only do you disrespect me, you're actually in this one day, in this one moment, you murder yourself, right? So if you're at that place, right, I would be doing everything in my power to find a community of people. If you're not married, right, like trying to crash on a friend's couch for 3 months, tell them you'll cook them dinner, 5 nights a week or whatever, 3 nights a week for, if you don't have an emergency fund, some savings saved up, find a way to leverage your community over your career and start, kind of prying up some of those floorboards in your life to get some balance. Because not all jobs are bad, not all careers are bad. It's this over indexing, it's this over commitment, right? It's the putting on of the religious hat, the religious gowns onto our careers that have made us miserable.
I think at first hearing that, it can sound radical, but I think the question underneath is you don't know till you try. And is anything you're currently doing any better or less radical? It's pretty radical to give your entire life to a corporation that doesn't care about you. You don't get that time back. Who's to say, like you said with your buddy, and I've been laid off a couple times, you're gone in an instant. And to put so much not just time, but let's say faith, that heart posture, that trust within something that really isn't trusting you back and isn't looking out for you. Like you and I's spirituality, I think that is something you have to put to the test and say, where can I reallocate my trust to something that is potentially trustworthy and that at least is worth the risk of seeing if it is trustworthy. So, and you're mentioning these things like crashing on a couch and cooking and taking time to, just enjoy life in the Sabbath, just to rest. Again, like you're saying, these seem to us modern men like, oh, those are radical things. But historically, what is actually more radical and has been less prominent for less time has been this whole working so much. And I think it points to what you talk about as the complete life that you are exploring on your YouTube channel, on focusing on and embracing the analog approaches in a digital world. I'm curious what you've discovered about that connection between those analog tools that you talk about and living what you call the complete life.
Yeah. Whew. I think it started with photography, and I'm being very broad with analog. I'm not being entirely non-digital, I guess, in a sense. But what I call like a decoupling, right? Like your phone, smartphones in general, became valuable because they did all these things in one, slab of glass or metal or whatever, including being a camera, right? And so I think one of the earliest things that I did, yeah, as soon as like I got out of Silicon Valley, I think within first few months is like I bought this camera that I'm filming this on right now, my Canon R5, and a couple lenses, and that set me back a few $1,000s. That, and I'm not in a position where I can just go drop $10,000 on a camera. That was it was not out of reach, but it still hurt. It was enough that it hurt, but it was a commitment to beginning that uncoupling from the smartphone and that always connected life, to have an object that I could go create with that wasn't drawing me back into feeds, into media, into communities and communication that I didn't need, right? Like I think a really scary thing about our modern time is that people aren't actually thinking alone anymore. Right, we see this with the rise of AI. We see this with even just the rise of like smartphones with like email, and even before like the iPhone, it was the BlackBerry, right, and like BBMs, and like it was this thing about like always being connected, right? Like there was never reprieve. There was never that like quiet moment in the woods to actually have like a thought, or like a coalescence of like thoughts and like putting things together. People used to like work in the cities and then take the weekends off out in the countryside, right? Europe is still kind of well known for this, where it's like in the summer you peace out from your job for like a month, right? Latin America, there's a lot of similarities with that too. We also we have the siesta in the middle of the day, right? Like how would you like to try to put something on someone's calendar at 2 p.m.? It's not going to work, right? Like for most things it's not going to work. Yeah, there's something about having tools that allow you to be present, right? So it started with the camera. It then has now evolved in the last 5 years to like the notebooks and the pen and paper life, and like the physical copies of books. It's like I remember, whatever, 15 years ago when I was first starting out in my career, I was thinking like, oh great, I can live this very minimalist life if all I have is just like my phone, right? Like I have all my books here, and I can have like this could be everything, right? It's like, wow, what a terrible idea that was. In concept it sounded great, but there is a lack of presence with it, right? Like we actually, I guess another way to put it, I've been kind of on my own faith journey that I've been sharing very publicly on my Substack. But I started praying the Rosary. My mom got sick with cancer about 3 years ago, and that was a huge shift for me, right? Like talking about analog tools, it's like we actually have these analog spiritual tools, right? These analog tools for developing our faith. And I remember people telling me like, why do you want to pray with beads? Like every one of these beads represents like biblical scripture. And they're like, what? I had no idea about that. I'm like, yeah. I was like, yeah. I'm like, yeah. And I had to like remind myself, like, wait a second, yeah, like I don't need the Bible app on my phone. Like I have this thing memorized. Let's see, like, okay, got mine on me right here. Let's see, let's pull it out. Yep, yeah, it's right there,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
Like
that's beautiful.
analog tools are pretty dope, right? They're pretty rad. And I think that's probably the first time someone's held a rosary and said dope. But like But yeah, that presence of like losing yourself in a prayer for 20 minutes, right? Like and it's not even losing yourself, it's actually like finding yourself. It sounds like very woo-woo-y almost to a degree, but yeah, the embrace of the analog tools for the sort of the focus of it, right? And the pleasure of being uninterrupted. There's something really delightful about it. And I think we've kind of lost that word, right? Like everyone wants to either be excited or they want to be anxious. They want to be so excited they're anxious, or so anxious that they need to be excited, right? And what if you just found something delightful? Like what if you found something delightful in taking a walk in the park, or somewhere? We have a lot of national forest out where we're at, so I'll walk there. But do that without a phone for like 20, 30 minutes. It's okay, right? Like, go, when I'm praying my rosary, like my phone's not on me, right? Like that's time. That's just like, that is this really, I think it's like a little chapel in the universe that you make for yourself, right? And it's very peaceful. It's very healing. I actually think we don't heal because we don't rest. We don't really rest, right? Even like the days we take off, you're like doom scrolling like TikTok or something, right? And it's like, yeah, maybe we feel anxious. I'm not a doctor. This is not medical advice. But for me, in my own heart, I know like, hey, I don't sleep with my phone next to me, right? Like on the weekends, I am pretty much completely disconnected from my phone, right? Like, and I have these tools, whether it's, pen and paper, a book, a camera, my rosary, whatever it is. I'm just getting outside where it's like, yeah, I don't, what do I need to scroll through, right? Like I have all these wonderful things before me. I think it really does come down to that idea of like presence. Um, and I think it's the other side of this careers as religions thing, right? Is like when I started praying my rosary, I didn't realize how much of a devotion scrolling on my phone was, right? It was that same muscle that was flicking the glass is now moving across the beads. And I was like, wow, there's something religious about just sitting on your phone. And most people wouldn't talk about it as so, but it really truly is. And
It's like adoration almost.
yeah, well, I think when you're doom scrolling, it's technically be considered admiration.
Yeah, I mean,
But
not in the pure definition religiously, but in the sense
yeah,
of a unbroken fixation that leads you into, let's say, a false contemplation.
yeah, well, it's not even contemplation. It's I heard I have John Eldridge's Wild at Heart here on the desk, and I think described it as like it's this like it's the tiniest cry for help, for consolation is really what it is. Like every one of those flicks, every time you're just like sitting there, you're pressing buy on something on Amazon, or you're just looking at that next 30-second clip trying to get like that feeling, that rush of you found something interesting, right?
Yeah.
Like all of that deep down is like the tiniest cry for consolation. It really is.
I like that way of seeing it. It also came up as you were saying it, were two things. One, I think as men especially, there's this innate desire to be physical with your hands and to make things, to create, to be tactile and figuring things out. You know, I have a little guy, and to see him just try to grab everything and make sense of the shape and put it to the test and to challenge it, but also find his limits in relationship to that shape. And when your life is completely digital, you've lost that innate connection with yourself to get your hands on something real and to create and to ground yourself in reality, because that stuff is real. Like the rosary beads, like that's wood, that's real materials. Like the digital is just all fabricated. And I think we've lost sense of ourselves when we've lost the ability to have human touch. And unfortunately now it's spilling over into a lack of physical intimacy. We've turned to things like porn instead of real connection with people and friendships, laughing and getting a sense of who someone is. My job is fully remote, and I always tell my clients, I'm thankful that I get to have the convenience of it. It works, but also if it was up to me, we would be meeting in person, because there's some sense of who you are that I'm missing if I don't get that in person. And I think unless you have real tools, analog tools, what else do you have to reground you into connection and presence, like you're saying? So that's the first thing. And then I think the second thing is, so within that, also with the physical, you're faced with the challenge of your own limits, right? You can only lift so much, you can only touch certain things with the surface of your hand. There's limits. Online, there's no limits, and that's an issue where we don't put guardrails up to say you're not allowed to do that. It's no, you can have what you want, when you want, how you want. And we talk about it like it's a positive thing to have this limitless type potential of what we can engage with. But I think if we see these analog tools as teachers to help us come to terms with the limits of who we are as humans in a beautiful way, to say, what if this limit shows me this is all there needs to be? What if I don't need to have it all, but what I have is enough? And that life lesson. So that's the first thing that came to mind. The second thing, more on a spiritual level, something I've thought about a lot is Christ died on a cross, and his first job that he learned from his father is a carpenter. So he would have known wood. He would have known the grains and what it felt like. And I can't help but see this spiritual symbolism that he worked this job in humility and quietness, and before he started his ministry, where he would have just known what it was like to work with his hands quietly, to engage in the limits, and to think about probably his future that God was calling him to. And then I imagine, I have this thought, like when he's hanging there, of course it's excruciating pain, or when he's, walking the cross up to Calvary, does he feel the grain like he did once as a young boy, but differently? Does he have that same smell of wood? Does he know the type of wood? And I feel like the answer is yes, that he came to those full human realizations, and he subjected himself to, even though he didn't have to. I mean, if anyone doesn't need a job, it's Jesus. Like,
He's very unhurried. Yeah, in his
yeah.
ministry.
And he could have cut right to the chase, but there was something about his understanding of how we were created to walk the same walk as a human, to say, this job I have working with my hands and working things out and building things is something I need to learn to do physically, that ultimately I'm going to show you how to do spiritually, how to engage with the limits of the cross, the pain and the suffering that bound him to the human limits of that crucifixion. And yet there's this call to a divine limitlessness within the limitations on that, where he transcends it. He's still divine. He's still overcoming it in and as he is bound to it as a human. So yeah, I'm just, what you're saying about the analog tools is just striking on a deeper level in those two ways.
What you brought in with the limits is beautiful, and it got me thinking about the other side of it, which is consequences, right? In the corporeal, the consequences are so real, right? If you are a murderer, right, especially in the United States, we're going to hunt you down. We're going to get you. We're dealing with a case like that here in Idaho right now. It's made national news. It's probably the only thing people know Idaho for right now, sadly. If you, pick any of the 10 commandments, any of the 7 deadly sins, if you commit those, if you fall into those, if you follow those, in the corporeal world, being present with other people, the consequences hit hard and fast. Online, consequences are a little bit more distant, right? Sometimes you may feel like there will never be consequences, or the consequences aren't apparent, and they aren't necessarily the same, right? But that doesn't mean that they can't inflict deep wounds in both you and the parties involved on the other side of your screen, right? And that's really what I think Jesus came to teach us. Is like, if you pursue a righteous life, if you live like him, it doesn't spare you the consequences, but it does grants you, I think, two things that are very powerful, which is purpose, which is something I think that's really, if we get down to the end, like, and I would even call it like worth, dignity, right? Like, that's the thing as men we're all trying to get at, right? Whether it's with our jobs, trying to find a partner, the house, the car, the money, whatever, right? We're just trying to find purpose, worth, dignity, that stuff, right? And so it's like you can actually get that right now with the Christian life, right? And then beyond a great adventure, it's not going to be easy, right? Right? There were Jews that complained to Moses and said, "Oh, we should go back to Egypt," right? It was kind of nice being a slave, right? Like there will always be people who love their slavery. But if you want to become liberated into the challenge of freedom, true freedom is actually a challenge, right? You go after that cross thing. And then what's really cool is the superpower you get. Everyone gets the superpower. Job gets it, right? Abraham gets it. David gets it. Jesus is obviously the king picture of it. He's the kingpin of it all, right? He's the bit, which is intercession, right? And which is what we were talking about earlier, right? Which is like that ability to intercede with someone, right? And suffer with someone, right? Maybe change someone's suffering, right? By either ending it or transforming it, right? We see this in Job, right? Like Job's friends basically piss off God. God's like, I'm not going to deal with these people. But if they go to Job, right, and Job prays for them, I'll listen to that prayer, right? I'll pick up that tab, right? And like Job only gets that power through suffering, right? And it's the same story over and over and over again in the biblical narrative, right? That like suffering grants the power of intercession, right? And it's such a powerful thing, I think, as men. I think we actually innately get this, right? That's why we're trying to go to our jobs, right? That's why we want to be strong. That's why we actually, most of us men want to sign up to suffer, right? Sitting in front of your computer screen is a weird form of suffering, right? But like, we want that thing. I think we crave that thing because something deep inside us says that's the thing that's going to give me the power to intercede, right? To help the widow, to help the orphan, right? Like your wife and your children, if you're a father, if you're a husband, they are widows and orphans without you, right? You living a life of a committed husband, a committed father, right, is that intercession always, right? And if you see a woman who's a widow, single mother, any woman who's been mistreated, intercede for them, right? You see children that need help, like intercede on their behalf, even in sometimes the smallest ways. The things that seem small to you are life changing sometimes for other people, right? But I think that's really what it's getting at, right? And you got into the like really like Ignatian tactilely, right? Like feeling of that moment of like, what does Jesus do on the cross but say to Mary, this is your son, and say to John, this is your mother, right? And now all of a sudden a young man who is going to have to go through a lot of suffering in his life, right, like has someone who is this amazing mother figure to him. And now this mother who's left without a son because she's watching her son die, right, now has this incredible man, this amazing man who goes on to write one of the gospel accounts, right? Talk about intercession. That's amazing, right?
Speaking of suffering, you mentioned your mom getting sick from cancer. If you're open to it, let's talk about the opposite of that, which is a son losing his mother. And I'm curious how you've navigated that grief as a man, what healthy grief might look like for men who don't often have models for this. We have both lost parents, and
Yeah.
my experience was it wasn't normalized for me. And then now working with a lot of people who are grieving to any degree, maybe it's not the loss of a parent, but guys just don't know how to do it. So I'd be curious to hear about your process and whatever you'd be open to sharing.
As guys, we don't get it because we don't want to stop and ask for directions. Like we don't want to ask for help, right? And grieving is actually something that needs to be done community, right? You can't do it alone. There are maybe some solo moments where you have to but grief isn't a solo march up Kilimanjaro, right? Like it's more like a meandering through a village that's sometimes feels like it's on fire, right, or buried under 3 feet of snow. And it's it's let's see, my mom was diagnosed with cancer, multiple myeloma, back in 2021, so about a year after the pandemic kicked off. It at first seemed like she might get better. We got a tough diagnosis from her doctors or whatever, where they basically gave her 6 months to live. She ended up living another 3 years, passed away at the end of this last year. So I had a lot of time to process. I'm very grateful for that, very thankful for that. this is another one where it's just like, yeah, we've lost a lot of rites and rituals. Maybe we didn't even have them as Americans. I think that's actually something to think about. Because as a Mexican, I knew exactly what to do. I like, as soon as my mom got diagnosed, I think it was 3, 4 months later, I was like on a plane to Mexico City, to just really spend a lot of time with my family there. It was actually about 2, 3 hours outside of Mexico City. Um, with cousins. I had a cousin who lost his mother. We're actually not even allowed to say lost, right? Because in Mexican culture, we know that the dead are awaiting the resurrection, and they're with our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. So it's like we if I it's funny how we talk in English. Actually, I think betrays our constitution, our internal constitution, and our own grieving and our own processing. It's like, my mom's not lost. Like, my mom is with all the saints and angels, and I am convinced about that. Like, I had some wild visions between being in Mexico for Dia de los Muertos 3 years ago and my mom's passing. So I began that process. I actually engaged with those sort of like ancient rites of my ancestors, and also got really serious about my faith. I've had a lot of conversations with both pastors and priests. I've been a part of the Protestant world, Catholic world. Love both. Still trying to reconcile that, in the same way that Mexico and America are still trying to get along. But I love it, and I just got really, I got very, I guess naked isn't necessarily the right word here, because I think really what it was like, um, I knew I couldn't be alone. I knew that like death had come for us all, right? That all of us were going to face death at one point. So I'm like, if the mortality rate is 100%, there have to be other people that have faced these things, right? I think you and I, like when our friendship started, right? Like my mom had just started entering this, and like I kind of like took note. I'm like, Wes is one of those people who's walked this path in a very different way, but there's going to be some similarities too. And so I just didn't go it alone. I didn't go it alone. I engaged those sort of like those rituals and those practices of things that you do to face those things, and even that is not enough, right? Like it was still, but actually I'll tell you this, it was actually enough to get me through that first week. Like the night my mother passed, my father and my brother, who did not do the proactive work, or at least they didn't do it in the way that our ancestors have done it, they were paralyzed in that moment, right? Like I literally watched my mom take her final breath, and I was the only one who could coordinate stuff with the doctors there in the hospital and the mortuary, and notifying her parent. My mom's parents are still around, my grandparents, right? Like I had enough of that. I had done enough to be a valuable person in that moment to tend to my family. I then had to do a lot of grieving after that. But I think what I would say to most people is like, if you don't have a ritual, you can make one, right? Like you can make one. I've heard stories of friends, and I've probably talked to half a dozen friends who've gone through this, where like you lose that parent in the first half of your life, or that parent passes, where now you're expecting to live more days without that parent in your life, corporeally, speaking, than you did, and that's, I think you have to make a ritual. If you don't have one, you gotta do something to have that right, that honor. Maybe it's growing a garden, right? Like a lot of people, like my neighbor, one of our lovely neighbors, who was a longtime friend of my mom's, Peruvian woman, more Hispanic people that are just Catholic, right? Like she has this little Marian garden, and like she was telling me, like leading up to my mother's passing, she's like, I was praying for your mom every morning in my rosary, and that like little devotional thing, right? And I was like, wow, that's so freaking beautiful. Like that is so good. And so maybe it's like a little garden. Maybe it's um, the Camino Santiago is blowing up again because people are realizing that, yeah, religion's real and you want to have some type of real religion, but like maybe it's some type of pilgrimage, right? I think actually right now for the year of Jubilee, everyone's encouraged to take some sort of pilgrimage. Getting our bodies involved in the corporeal experience of spirituality, because they are so connected. I think it was Tozer that said, right, like our job as Christians is to be mystics, and to like destroy that idea that like you can sever the sacred from the like secular, right? Like you can't. Right. Like they are connected, and so it's good to go find that thing. I've talked with friends who are European ancestry, more on sort of like the Northern European ancestry side, and then kind of digging deep to find what those things are for them. Friends that are African, Asian, I think we all have ways of going through that from an ethnic perspective, like I did with Dia los Muertos. But then also, I think, the church, right? That's what religion should do for us. Religion should give you more than 2 weeks bereavement and say, yeah, go on. We don't want to see you here, right? Like true religion actually says, come to me when you're grieving, and I want to be a part of that, and be a part of your grief and your healing, right? That's another good health check on. If your religion is telling you to go away during your bereavement, during your grieving, it's not a good religion.
Thank you for sharing that, man. I think that's real. I think it's so cool to see you honor these seemingly diametrically opposed cultures within you, and to honor the way they each express themselves, but primarily bringing up the indigenous and original rituals within the Day of the Dead and these different frameworks where, yeah, it is strange as Americans, right? Because the way the funeral happens and the way that people are buried and the way that we don't even talk about the people that have died, all those things are so removed. And it's made me think how I really didn't have a lot of rituals myself. And then I remember starting to date my wife, who's Catholic, and she has rituals where her no had a garden, and now we live in the house he bought 50 years ago, and he had a garden every single summer, and now she's
Yeah.
continuing it. And now with our son, he has little overalls and a gardening set, and he's out there. And every time she sees this white butterfly, it reminds her of her nana, who passed of cancer years before her no, and then the garden of her grandfather. And that's the ritual you're talking about. And I didn't have that. And she was talking about these things. And of course, Italian American, similar to Mexican
It's that
American,
Latin
where
blood. Yeah.
exactly, man, you can't get
Yeah.
away from the sense of honoring the legacy and knowing how to stay in contact with your lineage. And so it sent me on a journey. And I remember going to my dad's grave for the first time alone and just crying and talking to him. Because growing up, I was told, you can't do that. He's gone. He's in a better place. You can pray for him, but reframing that verse that we're surrounded by the great cloud of witnesses, and that if Christ is here, then all of creation is with him in our midst. And just how cathartic that moment was. And then wanting to introduce my wife to him and taking her to his tomb and having that conversation as if he was there, because in some ways his spirit was and is. And that was so, you mentioned this word earlier, like you can't heal without those rituals. That was it. It was like conceptual. I had made sense of it. I'd understood the loss and what it meant to me. In that moment, I felt the loss. I felt the healing. I felt the reintegration with him. And now we try to honor him on his day of death, like the Catholics do so well, in the memorialization of people, and try to do something to remember and reflect. But to your point, if we don't have any rituals similar to the analog tools that ground us in reality, then we will not be connected. And I think what people don't realize, that stays unresolved. It doesn't magically get better. You don't magically connect or move beyond that just because you're not thinking about that person or you think that they're gone anymore. You are forever permanently integrated with them and their life imprinted on yours. And the more you can come to terms with who they were to you, take the time to grieve, find the rituals, slow down. You talked about the Sabbath early and resting. Come to terms with the true reality of what that person meant. This last statement here, there was the Modern Wisdom podcast with Naval, and he talks about if you're making like a 5-year decision, why not spend up to a year making it? Because that's 5 years. You shouldn't make a decision overnight. But I'm taking that framework here and I'm saying it's the same if someone has passed away. If you knew them 20, 30, 40 years, you think a week is enough to come to terms and process like it's a vacation, you gotta stick with it. You gotta sit in it. And it reminds me of that Holy Saturday where, I mean, we think it's 3 days. Who for Christ, who knows how long it was in his experience. But the point is that he sat with an in and as death for an extended period of time where there was no
Yeah.
sign of strength or overcoming or hope. It was just the full embodiment of accepting what was. And I think that perfectly encapsulates the term grief. And to hear your story, it's so beautiful, man. And I agree, guys, go get a ritual that helps you do that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you the most terrifying part about it, which I think builds off of this, which, why not? We're here, right? I had to give this eulogy for my mother. It was actually my mother's last wish that I did the eulogy. Her service was like 8 days after she passed. It was like a couple days before Christmas. It was this wild rush where I'm like, my mom, I wasn't expecting my mom to pass away. I basically got a call from my dad, flew down, spent my mom's last 24 hours with her. And then all of a sudden I'm like coordinating all this, stuff with my, you know, my dad and all the stuff with my, mom's desires. And I'm like, oh, I have to write a speech, and the thing that I was kind of going through the scriptures, and the thing that actually terrified me in a good way. I don't think we actually talk about that a lot as men. Really terrified me was this idea that Jesus says, I believe it's in Matthew's gospel, like where two or more gathered, there I am in their midst. And specifically, where two or more gathered in my name, right? There I am in their midst. And I just got this vision of not like hippie, happy-go-lucky Jesus, like cuddling me, being like, it's going to be okay, buddy. I got this truth, right? Like we say in the creed, like that Jesus has ascended to the right hand of the Father, right? Like he is the King of Kings, Lord of Lords. Where he goes, he does not go alone, right? Like the entire kingdom of heaven comes with him, right? Like he doesn't abandon the kingdom to go places, to go comfort you, to go console someone else, right? And in that moment, I was like, oh my gosh, my mom's here with me. My great grandparents, her grandparents are here with me that I grew up with. All my ancestors, the saints, I'm like, oh man, I'm not just experiencing Jesus in my midst now, right? Because I had that moment that you had where I was at the cemetery, eventually and cried, and it just really got choked up. But then, kind of a little bit before, definitely now afterwards, is I find I'm at my deepest pains of grief when I actually forget the truest picture of heaven, right? Which is like, someone tried to ask me like where heaven is, and I say, well, it's above earth, right? And they're like, yeah, okay. I'm like, doesn't that start like the first atom up off the ground? Like heaven is already here. That's the reason why they crucified Jesus. He said actually the kingdom of heaven is near. He didn't mean that like it's coming soon, right? He literally meant like it is touching. It is literally now touching earth, right? It is touching this moment. It is touching all empires and all people and all things, right? In all creation. It is literally the closest thing to you that isn't you, right? That, because I probably should give some theological background. Reading my Bible in Latin, Spanish, and English, right? And the Spanish word that was used when Jesus, in I believe it's Mark's Gospel, chapter 4, he says, "Repent, the kingdom of heaven is near." That near word, acerca, it's that word it's used. You can find it in all the great Latin banger songs, right, in Latin America, right? It's like if someone's acerca, they're dancing with you. They're on top of you, basically, right? And Jesus is like, me and the entire kingdom are right here. And I've had so many beautiful moments where I'm deep in this grief and this pain of missing my mother, and I just hear, I'm right here, right? And it's like, are you doing the career religion thing, the corporeal religion, the material religion thing, right? Are you actually like, don't you remember like the truth about the reality of the kingdom of heaven? And it's like, yeah, oh shoot, that's right. It's like, oh, you're right here. And that's been a wild thing. I'm not like a theologian. I haven't fully processed that. But what's been really powerful about that truth, and I do believe that that's a truth. I think anyone who has a Bible can go pick that up, ask Jesus to speak those things to you, read through some of those gospel accounts, right? The kingdom of heaven is like on the doorstep of every molecule of your being. And that's a really good thing, because that means the people you love, the people that you wanted to see transformed and glorified in Jesus, the people that you miss, like I love that word you used, integration, right? Like I think we can think of that in a very technological singularity, non-personalized way. But like God came as a person, and He wants us to actually experience that truth of integration in our own personhood, but also the fact that He's like the Calvary has arrived, like the kingdom has arrived, like, and there are real people, real saints, real angels, and I, a real person, am in your midst, right? And it's like, man, that to me, it's been more than a comfort. The word that's used in the biblical text, the ancient biblical text, is like consolidate. Right? It's literally taking broken pieces and forming them back up into something solid. Right? Like it's the true consolation of religion. Right? It's not like a door prize at the end of the ride. Right? Like that is the truth of religion. Is this idea that like broken things can be mended again and made whole, right? And made whole in a better way than ever before. So hopefully that, again, I'm not a theologian, but hopefully for, any listeners out there who are dealing with some of that grief, like that truth, I think that reality is available to everyone.
I agree. And it's bringing up in me my own version of that. And thank you for providing that framework. I think the radical simplicity of knowing God is with you, something greater than yourself, but that includes you because you are special to a degree. It's just not limited to you. It reminds me of my own story of healing in that, of spending some time living in a monastery. And it was 6 weeks total, but I was a week in and it was hell. I was fighting because I wasn't cooking, I wasn't driving, I didn't have a phone, I wore the same 4 pairs of clothes with a robe over it. It was complete silence. And I retaliated because I wanted my attachments. And I'll never forget sitting, I was about to do a big sit and I was with my spiritual director, and he said the Sufi Muslims say there's 3 ways to encounter fire. You can see it, you can feel it, or you can become consumed. And he said almost everyone has seen fire before, and he equates this to silence and presence. Almost everyone has seen it and observed it from a distance. Very few people are willing to sit in the silence and to feel the stillness, and almost no one is willing to become consumed by it. And he said, Wes, you have to be consumed. And I remember sitting in my own silent prayer, and similar to you, I had this strong vision, and it took me back to the moment my dad passed away and holding his hand. And again, I had remember conceptually processing it, informationally, historically. I had never experientially processed it. And sitting in that moment, telling him bye and seeing a vision of Christ right there with me, Jesus, and he didn't say anything. He was just there with me in the moment, just like yours, where it's just this radical, simplistic acknowledgement. I'm here. And that's all you need to know. I'm not going to try to fix it, correct it, avoid it, help you get out of it. What is going on is what is going on, but I'm here with you. And it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes of Jim Finley. He says, whatever it means that God protects us, it doesn't mean he protects us, because we still get sick, we still die, we still lose things in life. So it certainly doesn't mean protection in the sense of keeping us from experiencing the pain and suffering. He says he is protection in and as a presence within the suffering we experience from not being protected. And that's what we can tap into. And I think so many of us men have trouble just being. We have to solve a problem. We have to explain something. We have to prove we're right. We have to feel functional and utilitarian. No, there must be something that I can do. And the reality is, most of the women in our lives, in our relationships, most of our friends, most of our families just want us to be, just want us to chill the hell out and actually be present and slow down long enough to just take up the space as you are. And it takes practices like the meditation and contemplation and prayer to help you slow down. But when you do, like you're mentioning, the integration and healing comes. So yeah, I think that's such a powerful lesson you learned. One last thing I'd like to touch on, if you're open to it. We've obviously been using overtly spiritual language here. And you said something interesting. You said religion's making a comeback, which I agree, where
Hmm.
we're seeing media accept the lead actor, The Chosen, was on all the late night shows. And this guy I know that leads worship, him and this artist Jelly Roll sang a single called something Hallelujah on a late night show. 2 or 3 years
Hmm.
ago, no, that would have been shunned, right? So those are obviously shallow versions, but we are seeing a lot of people be interested in religion. And yet there still seems to be this very strong underlying opposition to religion that is especially expressed through the jobs, right? I don't know about you, but in my line of work, it's so interesting. It's more offensive to say you are a Christian. It's the only thing that's actually not inclusive. You can talk about anything else and make sure everything else has a place, a space. But if you're a Christian, then you're a bigot, you're racist, you're, whatever, fill in the blank. And I've had a hard time myself striking that balance to say I always want to respect different worldviews and never push it on someone. But yet there seems to be this assumption that everything that is anti-Christian can be pushed onto me, and the work that we live in, the corporate culture, which is stamped with it. And I struggle with that tension. I'm wondering if you can speak to any experiences you've had where you felt that, and what that's been like trying to respectfully set a boundary and push back in your honest and humble expression of your Christianity.
What I would say about the interest in religion is I think there's just a general grasping that our generation and the generation coming up behind us have for religion, because we're realizing the nation state can't be our God, and politics is a terrible religion, and corporations and economies aren't great religions either. I think being participants in those things can be absolutely healthy components of any religious life, or life, after serving Jesus Christ. Yeah, I think it's heartbreaking to see, and I'm trying to be realistic and generous and kind. I think the vast majority of people out there are, at least in the United States, from what I've seen, are genuinely curious about religion and what we'll specifically call like the Christian religion, right? I think as Christians, we've done a very good job at confusing people, to be honest. The fact that we have Catholicism and the Lutherans and the Episcopalians and the Protestant non-denominations and the Quakers, and Jesus's one prayer before he dies is that we would all be united, and we have actually quite spectacularly, mostly actually in the United States, of any other place, we've actually failed at that prayer. Our freedom of religion we've allowed to be a freedom to be divided within religion, which was actually never even the vision of our founders. Benjamin Franklin had this beautiful moment when he passed. He invited all the different faith groups. You got these Quakers holding Catholics in Pennsylvania, marching in the parade, with his, celebrating his life. And that was the vision of America, was that it wouldn't be a freedom from religion, it'd be a freedom of the expression of religion, so that religion could reunite, right? So that the Christians actually could begin stitching each other back together, right? Europe had actually divided the Christians and the Eastern side of things, right? And we all need to take responsibility for it. We've all been guilty, right? So we got our own thing to work on that we need to be forthright with to the people who aren't Christians, right? Which is like, our God, our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, right, not only died for my sins, he had a prayer for us, and that's how we would all be one as him and the Father are one. We are epically failing at that. But that's the thing that we need to go after harder than anything else. All this talk about revival, we need to be talking about reunion. Revival will come with reunion, but we need to humble ourselves and say, like, we are so far off of that path, right? We need to go all in on the reunion effort. And we need to be open and honest with that, with anyone who's curious or questioning about that's the thing that we're after, right? It's going to involve serving the poor and being humble and living like Christ, right? But you can't live like Christ. You can't live like Christ if you are divided with your brothers. in Christ, right? If you're not even going to pretend like a Catholic is not a Christian, or you're going to pretend like a Protestant's not a Christian, right? Like it even says it in, I believe it's in Matthew's gospel account. It's like, if they're not, if they're doing work in the name of Jesus Christ and it's working, right? Like if they're not against us, they're for us. We need to start reuniting. That's probably going to be the next act of my life is working on this reunion thing. I've hinted at this thing. I have a lot of love, for the Catholic Church and especially everything that's going on right now with the Pope passing and my mother having passed, and that being my connection to the indigenous part of my heritage in Mexico and everything. That's a huge part of my life, and I've also just been loved and carried through a lot of my adult life by many Protestant friends, Protestant churches that I've been a part of. My wife grew up in the Protestant church. My wife's a German American, the sort of the epicenter, the beginnings of Protestantism. So we got to work on that. I think for the opponents of Christianity, they aren't any match for us. We've always won, and it's not because of our own strength and brilliance. I was reading this past winter a massive tome about the Spanish Civil War, and I thought for certain there would be this epic battle versus the Christians and the what became the sort of anti-Christian movement in Spain. It was so striking what actually happened in the end. Is there was this patience on the side of the Christians, and there was actually a lot of and I don't want to discount this. There were a lot of ill things that were done on this side of the Christian side of things. In the same way that Germany used to be a Christian nation, look what happened there, shortly after in World War II. But the leadership in the Spanish side to hold together a patience to allow God to work. The other side crumbled and basically turned itself in on itself and defeated itself. And it's not a glamorous battle story from a tactician perspective. It's not this glorious, epic battle and victory. It's probably why we don't learn about it a lot in history. It's like it. So the anti-Christian forces just like crumble themselves because the Christians were patient and waited on God. And it's like, yeah, it's kind of and it's just like it's the same thing that we see in the Proverbs and the Psalms, we see in the Old Testament, we see in the New Testament, we see what comes after in the early Christian era is like the opponents of Christ have never succeeded in the long term, right? We have 2,000 years of history to prove that, right? You don't even need to look at the Bible. Obviously, the Bible has the a chunk of history, and truth there too. We don't, and we have that. That's no boast on our part. I think our faithfulness and humility will invite more people to be humbly victorious with that movement, and I think we'll find more of that delight in every day. I know there are people who I've interacted with and done work with, and who I absolutely love that are not Christians. Finding a way to delight in life with them, serve them, participate in life with them. I don't know the totality of all outcomes. I'm not God, praise the Lord. But I think as Christians, that's what we're called to do. And I think anyone who finds themselves hungering in their hearts for something that's beyond their career, beyond wealth, beyond status, the thing that Christ offers us, because it's not the religion of Christianity. It won't be the institution of the church. While those are things that Jesus will use, it's ultimately Christ. It's Christ who actually grants us this beautiful, wonderful ability to delight in others and delight in others' delight. I think a lot about that. Like Jesus is telling the Roman centurion that there's no one with greater faith in all of, the land of the Jews than this Roman centurion, and him delighting in that faith of that seemingly unbeliever yet believer all at once, right? That's, I think that's the thing that we really need to be about. Ultimately, I guess I'll finish this thought with this. It's like in the Latin rendering of Psalm 23, it says, the Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He leads me beside calm waters through green pastures, and he refreshes my soul. That line, he refreshes my soul, is actually anima meam convertit. I think it's the most beautiful Latin phrase that you'll see reprised throughout the Bible. And it literally means like my soul is his and he converts me, right? Like as Christians, we need to get off the thing about like, we're going to go convert people, right? We're going to go save souls. It's like all of that work is thankfully done by God and his personhood of the Holy Spirit. Our obedience is what allows us to witness those beautiful things. And I think as we continue to take a obedient posture to loving the neighbor as self, loving God, loving the Lord our God with all of our heart, we'll find ourselves witnessing more of those beautiful moments of conversion, not just in others, but in ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the perfect place to end, of focusing on our ability to be obedient. You mentioned manhood modeled within the centurion, and obviously the ultimate archetype of a man within Jesus. And this process, with all the different topics we've talked about, learning to be obedient to the hard work of healing, of being present, of resting, of sitting with the pain and discomfort, of wrestling with the questions, of detaching from the certainties of life and what the world has said we should put our identity in, being faithful to relationships and community and servitude, and making sure that we are living this generous life. All these things, what does it mean, can be encapsulated in this question: what does it mean to be a truly faithful man of God? And I think that question is what's leading your life so beautifully, and was entrenched in all the answers you gave, which were really gripping. And this conversation and the work that we're both doing in our own ways of asking ourselves, man, what does it mean today to live a faithful life with the person that I am, with the life that I'm given, with the resources that I have, and trusting all of that is done in and through us, but by a greater power. So, man, thank you for your time. It was just so beautiful to be able to dialogue. Selfishly could keep going on, but we won't make this a Joe Rogan podcast.
Well,
three
we could do a
hours, but
sequel if the
I
people
think we
love it.
certainly need a sequel, man.
Yeah.
There were several things I wanted to dive into. So before I let you go, man, where can people find your work and what you're up to?
Yeah, you can find me on Substack. I write a newsletter there called Siesta in the Storm, where I explore little bits of Spanish mysticism, and just my relationship with Jesus and this life that I've been called to. You can find me on YouTube. If you just search for Stephen Foster, or go to youtube.com. I think it's /@ Stephen Foster. Don't quote me on that, actually, but if you search for me, I used to do a lot of photography stuff on there, kind of moving more, like I said, to the analog tools in general, doing a lot of stuff around like journaling and just thinking through writing. Yeah, those are probably the two best places to find me: Substack, YouTube. Yeah.
Sweet, man. We'll put that in the show notes along with some of your references that you mentioned. And thank you again for your time, brother. Until next time.
Dude, it's always good being with you, man. Love you, man. Catch you
Love you
later.
too.